Good evening, everybody. My name is Anat Dmati, and I am the founder and faculty director of the Corporation Society Initiative, CASI. CASI is a business school initiative that's powered by Lisa, Tina, myself, and wonderful student leaders. And they make it worthwhile, and they often moderate as well. So we like at CASI this quaint concept of truth. And we try to have serious discussions about things that are true and things that matter. And we have a great guest to do that today, speaking about media, which is in the news itself every day right now and under attack. Some people call it the enemy from within, which is very scary. So I'm going to let Hendrick Townley, our wonderful student leader, take it from here, introduce Jesse Eisinger, and I look forward for this event. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. Thank you guys so much for coming. CASI is really overjoyed to be hosting Jesse Eisinger at the GSB today. Jesse has covered the financial world since 1992, holding power to account in his reporting through publications including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Atlantic, the New Yorker, and many more. In 2011, Jesse was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for his series, The Wall Street Money Machine, which exposed questionable Wall Street practices that contributed to the financial crisis. He is the author of The Chicken Shit Club, published 2017, examining how the Department of Justice lost the ability and willingness to prosecute corporate executives. Currently, a senior editor and reporter for ProPublica. His latest series, The Secret IRS Files, revealed how Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Warren Buffett, and America's other wealthiest individuals pay a much smaller percentage in income tax than do everyday Americans. Accordingly, it's no surprise that Jesse has been described as a fearless reporter who does not care much about eating lunch on either Wall Street or K Street. Jesse's a graduate of Columbia College, where he majored in American Studies. Please, everyone, join me in welcoming Jesse to the GSB today. Thanks. Jesse, we're so glad to have you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I'll ask a couple of questions first that I prepared, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So please be thinking through our conversation, because we'd love to hear from you as well. OK, so to start, a lot of us are students here, and we're at turning points in our career paths and reflecting on where to head next. And I'm just curious to hear from you about how you chose to become a journalist and what led you to choose that career path.
Sure. Well, one correction, I really care about where I go to lunch. I just don't care about who I'm with. Yeah, I'm food obsessed. So I fell into journalism. I didn't have any idea what I wanted to do from college. I was a faculty brat. My dad was a political science professor. He was actually at the Center for Advanced Study here, in behavioral sciences, I guess, for 1 year. So I went to Gunn for my sophomore year of high school. And so kind of fell into journalism because I found myself in Chile. And always thought, I assumed that I would go back to academia in some way, like my dad and my grandfather and uncles. And then sort of 5 or 6 years in, I realized I had no interest in academia. I didn't want to kind of study one thing in depth like that. And I realized that my intellect was suited for journalism. And I liked the ability to kind of be curious about the world and bounce from things and call anybody out I wanted to ask questions, and they didn't always have to answer me, but I got to ask whatever question I wanted, as impertinent as it might be, and just learn as much as I could and absorb things. And so I really realized finally that I sort of had respect for journalism as a profession, and then it turned out I was suited to it, and so here I am.
Did you say you realized you wanted to become a journalist in Chile?
No, it took like 5 years. I just assumed, as I was kind of starting out as a journalist, I didn't know anything about journalism. I got fired from my first job in journalism for rank incompetence. Then I worked for 2 publications that thankfully didn't have any readers. And so I screwed up royally in those 2 publications. And then I found myself at the Dow Jones Newswires, which was the ticker, the famous ticker. And I was covering IPOs, and then I was covering biotech. And at that point, I realized that biotech was this extraordinary place to learn journalism and learn sort of principles of journalism, because it's at the nexus of brilliance and greed. You had these kind of genius scientists who wanted to create new medicines to save people, and then you had total charlatans who wanted to exploit the hopes and fears of sick people. And so it was an extraordinary lesson in kind of the high points of capitalism and the low points of capitalism. And I gravitated to writing about the charlatans. My feeling was that these companies should be providing medicines that work and telling the truth, and every time that they didn't, that was news. I don't think that's the only definition of news, but it's sort of the definition of news that I kind of happened on. And so whenever they lied or cheated or defrauded people, I kind of treated that like it was interesting and tried to uncover more about that. And then I sort of realized that that was the calling that I had, was to uncover the frauds. And then by then I'd realized, well, I'm a journalist. I'm not going to be an academic. And not only am I a journalist, but it took me a long time to kind of admit this to myself, but I'm an investigative journalist. I always thought investigative journalism was a bullshit marketing phrase, kind of pretentious. But but I think the principle of holding the powerful accountable through journalism is a worthy one, and I made my peace with it, and I've had fun doing it.
So I heard in covering charlatans and holding power to account, we touched on a couple of your best-known works in the introduction, whether it was reporting on Wall Street practices after the financial crisis, looking at how the Department of Justice prosecutes corporate executives or does not, and also like looking at the tax returns of America's wealthiest individuals and the disparity there. How would you describe like what hooks your interest and the themes that you've covered, and whether I'm curious if that's changed at all over the course of your career and your reporting?
Yeah, I've gradually come to realize that the theme of my career, my beat, is elite impunity. I have covered powerful wrongdoing and how they get away with it. And that has been the kind of lodestar for my career. And those are the kinds of stories that I gravitate to. And a lot of investigative reporters write about victims and the downtrodden, and that's absolutely worthy. And we do a lot of great coverage of that at ProPublica, and that's just not my bag. I like bad guys, and I like trying to home in on what they're doing, and particularly I'm interested in things that aren't necessarily illegal but are wrong, that are warping society in some way. And so, the IRS files is a perfect example of something where we tried to expose billionaire tax avoidance by overturning the consensus approach to tax reporting, which is to look at the effective tax rates of people based on their income. So the normal way that you look at taxes is you say, well, how much income did they report, and how much tax did they pay, and what percentage is that, and that's an effective tax rate. And most reporting was to say, well, the top rate for wealthy people, it's actually not wealthy people, it's people with high income, is 40% now, and they're actually paying 23%, so there's this disparity, and so that's wrong. They should be paying 40%. But what we tried to do was overturn that by saying, look, they actually artificially keep their income low, and if you keep your income low, voila, you're going to pay low taxes. And so let's compare your taxes to actually your wealth growth, which is the way economists think of income. And that took courage from our editor-in-chief and president, CEO, to publish that because it was unorthodox, and we got attacked for that. And the reason why that's interesting is it's totally legal, perfectly legal. It's a very simple method to avoid taxes. You keep your income low. You can borrow against your assets. And so that was kind of a groundbreaking analysis that we came up with the help of economists and theorists and lawyers, and I worked with my colleagues on that. But that's the kind of thing that I'm interested in, is to try to overturn conventional wisdom with facts and the power of assembling facts to make to have a revelation.
Thank you. So for this next set of questions, I'm curious to dig in with you on what different models look like for sustainably supporting high quality media now and into the future. There's been a lot of hand-wringing in recent years as traditional news organizations all over the country have been struggling, laying off reporters and even folding entirely. ProPublica, where you work right now, and which you've been involved with since nearly the beginning, is a really interesting example as a nonprofit, online-only, investigative-focused news source. I'm curious to hear more from you on what the inspiration was for ProPublica getting started, and whether you think that is a model that the rest of the media industry can learn from.
Well, I mean, what you alluded to is that the media model is catastrophically broken. We are in a terrible crisis. And there are two parallel crises that have been building for decades now, and they're throughout my entire career this has been true. The internet has broken the business model, and then there has been a parallel effort to destroy the idea that there was anything like an objective media, that the media was hopelessly subjective, and there was a left critique of the kind of Chomsky critique that this was manufactured consent in the media, but this was really much more powerful on the right, that the media was hopelessly liberal, and so there's been this kind of parallel attack. So when ProPublica gets created in 2008, where I wasn't there. I wasn't part of the creation of the place. It was created by my former editor at the Wall Street Journal, Paul Steiger. It was founded with a grant by the Sandlers, Herb and Marion Sandler, who had founded a California mortgage bank that I'd written some nasty stories about when I was at the Wall Street Journal. They provided some bad mortgages. But Herb was very charming, and when he got me on the phone, he almost convinced me that they hadn't. When I got him on the phone, I should say, yeah. And I was lucky that he wasn't too pissed off, so Paul was able to hire me at ProPublica when I was laid off. So the idea there was that in 2008 there was this mainstream media, mainstream newspaper crisis. Newspapers were closing, and the thing that they were also getting rid of was the expensive investigative reporting, because that was we are slow and we don't produce a lot of stories when it's not necessarily the most popular thing for readers. And so the Philadelphia Inquirer and the Miami Herald were getting rid of investigative reporters, and ProPublica was going to be a small part of the solution to the investigative news crisis. And we have, I think, ProPublica did actually reinvigorate investigative news and kind of make people realize that it wasn't so unpopular and that it could be an anchor for quality journalism, and it also could support subscriptions because it wasn't commodity coverage. It was the kind of coverage that you can provide. It's unique and high quality, and and does actually attract readers. So we were in the nonprofit space, but I think we helped convince news organizations to not jettison their investigative reporting. But of course, ProPublica is huge by the standards of a nonprofit. I think we're the biggest nonprofit news organization, depending on how you count NPR. In the United States, we have about $45-50 million budget, about 200 people now. I mean, when I joined, we were under 10 million and we had 20-25 people. So it's been a place of extraordinary growth, but we're not remotely replacing what's been lost in the closure of newspapers around the country and the closure of media organizations. So the business model is still totally broken. The only place that has solved it really, I think, is the New York Times, and they've solved it by giving games to people and sneaking in news while they're doing that. And ProPublica has survived for now. We'll see if there are new attacks from the administration that challenge our funding models. We can talk about that later if you're interested. So we haven't solved the crisis at all. In fact, the crisis has gotten much worse, and it's mushroomed because the new issue is that facts don't win anymore, and I'm sure we'll get to that. This is a polycrisis in media, of which ProPublica is a tiny solution, and one that is important, but minor.
So it sounds like we're very far off from a perfect solution here.
Sorry to disappoint. Yeah.
One form of a solution has come in the form of some very wealthy individuals buying up newspapers across the country. So I think in recent years it's been the Washington Post, LA Times, and Boston Globe have all been bought by billionaire Americans, to the criticism of those who fear inappropriate editorial influence. And it seems like these fears were realized most recently when Jeff Bezos announced that the Washington Post's editorial section would now prioritize personal freedoms and free markets at the expense of other perspectives. When should we be worried that media is concentrated in the hands of too few, and how important is that editorial independence? I'm also actually reminded of digital tech companies, another form of new age, the newest form of media today, in which we're totally used to these billionaire owners owning Facebook, Twitter, and et cetera.
Yeah, I think it's not quite the issue of wealthy owners that we should be worried about, because if you think about a world of 30 years ago with the most important newspapers in the country were the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the LA Times, and the Washington Post. And those were owned by the Sulzberger family, the Graham family, the Chandler family, and the Bancrofts own I think I got the order wrong, but people will know the Bancrofts own the Wall Street Journal. And so they're family-run operations. They were so they were owned by wealthy people. There was wealthy families. But they were stewards of these public trusts, essentially, and they took them very seriously, and they didn't meddle with the editorial at all. And the editorial pages, they had varying degrees of influence on the editorial pages. Obviously, the Wall Street Journal editorial page tilted right, even far right. The Times was regarded as liberal or center-left. And the families didn't really play an enormous role. So the ownership doesn't matter as much as the attitude. And so what you have with Bezos, the early sign with Bezos was that he was going to be a steward in that kind of old-fashioned sense of not meddling with the news and wanting to have a powerful outlet for on the editorial side or the op-ed side, the opinion side, a kind of ecumenical wide range of views. Liberal, left, center left, was sort of what it appeared to be, and then he would invest in the news operations. And then you have Patrick Soon-Shiong, who I think is a charlatan and a liar and a lunatic, and so I was never hopeful about. Am I allowed to say that? Are we on the record? And I think my fears about the LA Times and in his stewardship of the LA Times have been borne out, although I didn't see him as a kind of craven Trumpist. But then again, it turns out that he's got drugs that he wants approval for at the FDA. And so if your interests, your business interests, are so important to you, as it seems they are for Jeff Bezos, then that can trump things. So the difference between the Sulzberger family and the Bancroft family was that these guys have other financial interests, and they're either pain points for an administration that can push on them, or they're just more important. And it turns out maybe Jeff Bezos wants to go to space more than he wants to own the Washington Post. Or he wants to own the Washington Post in a purely instrumental way to express power in a way that doesn't disturb the powerful entities. So the problem isn't necessarily that it's wealthy people. It's wealthy people with distorted other priorities and no sense of public responsibility. And I think that's a real crisis.
Well, it's comforting to know that the health of our modern day media is up to the whims of the billionaires. So.
Yes, what's wonderful. Yeah, so happy.
So we've had a national reckoning, I think, in recent years with misinformation. We kind of alluded to that with how social media has been breaking the media. Ecosystem. And alongside that, Americans' trust in the news media has reportedly reached historic lows. One piece of good news is that it's come out that local news is regarded as a very trusted source of news among everyday Americans. But the bad news is that local newspapers are just struggling. And I was surprised to learn that since 2005, the U.S. has lost more than a third of its newspapers. How can the news media win back the trust of Americans at a time when we're so far apart, given that what's happening, what's operational right now is not working?
Yeah, I think one thing to recognize is that this isn't accidental, that there's been a concerted attack on the news media. And there's been an attack on the news media for ideological reasons. There's, as I was saying earlier, and there's obviously also a business model problem. But the media hasn't really wanted to kind of recognize and name this kind of ideological attack because it undermines the sense of itself as an objective profession that is kind of going out and gathering facts and presenting facts in the fair and accurate way that they can, and something that reflects not necessarily all sides, but as many sides as you can in a fair way. And so what happened was this ideological attack, especially from the right, came and kind of undermined that approach and discredited it, and essentially said, whatever you're producing, it's kind of liberal and it should be rejected. And so you have Fox News saying you're fair and balanced, and the New York Times saying no, we're fair and balanced, you're not fair and balanced, and there's a kind of bizarro world assumption of your professional standards to undermine what you're trying to produce. So how can we build back trust? Well, the answer that we have to build back trust is to do more of the same harder. Like, we're going to do more facts, and we're going to give you facts harder, and we're going to be even more fair, and we're going to bend over backwards to show you that we have even greater professional standards. So what we do at ProPublica is explain at great length to people what our process is, how we've gathered this, how fair we are. We talk a lot about our no surprises process, which is that every single fact that we have gathered that we're planning to use about a subject, we run that by that person ahead of time, or that entity ahead of time, to get their to tell us what is true, and get their comment and get the context of it. And we're interested, and we run the premise by them. So, and we say we're being intellectually honest about whether we've approached this fairly and correctly, and trying to have this extraordinary rigor. We understand our flaws. We understand both that we can get facts wrong, we can gather facts and they could be wrong, or that that the premise of these investigative stories can be wrong. I mean, the most catastrophic thing in investigative journalism, which can happen frequently, is that all of the facts are right, but the premise is wrong. And you can get that wrong because we have flaws, where you have cognitive bias, and and everybody is seeing this in the same way, from the reporters to the editors. So we're constantly attacking the premise of our stories and disbelieving our stories as we're believing in them, to try to produce these extraordinarily rigorous things. And then we go to them and we insist to the subjects of the stories that we care about their responses. And increasingly, the responses is, we're not going to respond to you. You could potentially produce something that's untrue, and then we will publicly go out and tweet or post that these are fake facts, or these are wrong, and try to undermine you. And so we have an extraordinarily antagonistic relationship with the sources or the subjects of the stories. And even when nothing has happened, even when we haven't produced stories, it can redound against us and be the source of attacks for us. So just recently, we were investigating, and I'm an editor now, and I have 5 reporters, and we were investigating a question of whether Pete Hegseth had actually attended West Point. You were going to ask about this. Okay. All right. Well, I'll tell you this anecdote. So Hegseth had said that he had gotten into West Point, but that he had decided not to go. But he had described it in slightly inconsistent ways over time. It was kind of curious. So we called up West Point and said, "Do you have a record of Pete Hegseth having been accepted?" And they said no. The PR operation, the office that is in charge of publicly explaining what the things that are important about West Point to the public and to journalism, the office said that. So we actually wanted to go back to make sure to understand their answer, and we said, does this mean that he was not accepted that he never applied? And they said there's no record that he'd ever applied, so he was not accepted. So we started preparing a story that we thought was pretty significant about Hegseth having been misleading. But our no surprises process is that we go to the subject, of course. So we went to them, and we had this extraordinarily antagonistic interaction. But eventually, they produced the acceptance letter from Hegseth, and we decided, well, that's good enough for us. We're not going to do a story about that. And that's what journalism is. You chase a rumor down. We had been very convinced that this was true because West Point's professional office had told us twice that it was on the record that it was true, but they successfully knocked it down, and we decided not to publish. And the next day, Hegseth tweeted that we were preparing an attack piece on him, and we got flooded with attacks about how we were ginning up a false attack on Hegseth. And everybody always attacks us on the right as Soros funded, because Soros gave us like $5 in 2011. It has nothing to do with anti-Semitism or anything like that. And it went on for days and days. And I went out on Twitter and I explained what the process had been. And then people, the way this kind of epistemic closure works is that they didn't say, oh, that was good and your professional standards are admirable. They said, why didn't you figure out that West Point was lying to you and investigate West Point for lying to you? Which was like ludicrous. But it was immediately interpreted like it was a deep state conspiracy from the West Point PR person, who is now obviously in Nome, Alaska, has been doing PR for polar bears, exactly. And so it was the most sort of, it was interpreted in the most conspiratorial way possible. There was no way that we could explain to people that was reassuring to them or exonerating of us. And we had done everything. We had not published a false story. We lose either way.
I was about to say, it sounds like an incredibly hard position to be in, because either you try to publish in a very, very timely manner, and you take the West Point acceptance letter at its word, and then you make a big mistake, and then they call you out for it, or you go through all the due diligence and you take the extra time, by which point you're like way behind the real-time news cycle of Twitter and Facebook and everything like that, and then it sounds like you still get criticized for it.
Yeah, I mean, I thought what we had done was had a terrible scare and a near miss of a catastrophe, and it still was something that created an immense amount of attack for us anyway, without having made a mistake. It was an incredible experience.
That sounds very frustrating.
Yeah.
Several major media organizations recently, Disney ABC News, Paramount CBS News, Facebook, have all settled in lawsuits that were filed by President Trump, despite what is well known to be very strong First Amendment protections in the US. And then other media organizations, such as the Des Moines Register, are facing lawsuits now. And as if that wasn't enough, just last week, the Trump administration announced that the White House would now determine which media outlets are going to access President Trump as part of the press pool, taking that control away from the White House Correspondents Association for the first time. Should we be worried that media's ability to hold political power to account is at risk in a fundamental way?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think that takes any elaboration. I don't call those settlements, I call them bribes to get the administration off their back for reasons that have nothing to do with journalism, because what they've got is mergers, or they've got other ancillary business interests, these large corporations. So again, we go back to, is the problem that we've got billionaires owning media outlets? Well, the Comcast is not. It's owned by wealthy, nice wealthy people, but it's corporate owned, and their corporate interests. And so that's obviously a problem too. So their willingness to settle were acts of immense cowardice that did an enormous amount of damage to journalism and to the public interest, and they should be ashamed. Those cases were utterly frivolous, completely ludicrous cases that had nothing to do with any kinds of serious malfeasance or irresponsibility on the part of the journalism outfits. Now, journalists screw up a lot, and when we do, we should pay a price. The CNN just settled a libel case in Florida where they were disparaging the subject of the story in internal emails, something that we try very hard not to do. We try to express ourselves about the subjects of our stories consistently in our internal communications and our external communications. And they showed all sorts of bias against, and then they got a story that looked like it was wrong, and we obviously try to publish things that are not wrong but are right. So journalism is far from perfect, and I don't want to pretend it is, but those stories that they did about the president were not erroneous in any way and not unfair in any fundamental way. So what we're seeing is cowardice. But the Trump administration has taken a new tack against journalism that we have not seen from any administration, certainly in my lifetime. The labeling that we're the enemy of the people, that, as everybody in this room knows, I don't have to tell them, it's an echo of authoritarian regimes of the past. And what we're seeing is that the use of power works. It's like, that's why they call it power. And it can work to make people afraid. People have mortgages to pay. They've got college tuition. They want to keep their jobs. And so it's not actually that hard to scare people and get them into line and to have them capitulate. And so what I assume you're seeing all across many of these publications is a kind of reining in of the stories and a toning down of the stories. Now, they're still doing, if you look at the Washington Post, and I'm a little biased because my wife works there, they're doing kick-ass reporting still on the Trump administration, and it's very muscular. So Bezos has not yet either not yet influenced the publication or not yet really kind of neutered it in an entirely catastrophic way. But I think over the course of, over the expanse of journalism, we're probably seeing big effects from the Trump administration. And we ain't seen nothing yet. It's going to get much worse. They've learned they can get money and extort people and bribe and intimidate and use their power. So we've just taught them to keep doing it. And so I expect some kind of attack on the nonprofit sector. We'll see what that looks like.
That's worrying to hear. My last question, I hear that you were a consultant for season 3 of HBO's hit series Succession. And I was curious to know how accurately you think popular media portrays the world of corporate power and finance.
Yes, that was a great experience, and I've told this story before, so my hardcore fans will be bored now. But what I would do is they would write a scene, and it would be hilarious, and it would be really brilliant, and I'd say, this is really funny, but people, it doesn't work like this. They wouldn't say this, and they would take it out every single time. And I think that they had the kind of luxury of having a surfeit of incredibly hilarious jokes and brilliant writers, and they really cared about getting things right. They cared about verisimilitude. And so I think it is the best depiction of corporate life and corporate power ever to appear in journalism. In media and TV and movies. I think it was a genius show, and not because I made a small contribution to it, but it was a lot of fun.
That's great to hear.
Yeah.
With that, let's open it up to audience questions. Yes, center stage.
Yes, well, thank you. This was incredibly concerning, actually, really more to hear than anything. But I guess I was just wondering, how do you expect ProPublica to act when the Trump administration probably inevitably finds an excuse to sue you guys? And then also just generally, when you're looking across the industry, how is the journalism industry kind of planning on preparing for to manage itself against this onslaught from the administration, from further lawsuits, kick out of the press pool, all that kind of stuff? Like, I'm kind of curious how ProPublica and the broader industry is planning for it.
Yeah, so I think the broader industry hasn't prepared properly for it. I think there was an abstract idea that there were going to be all sorts of attacks, and then the industry wasn't kind of unified or well prepared for it. So, kicking the AP out of the White House pool was something that I think every mainstream organization should have united and gotten together and said, we're going to stay away from all the press conferences, or we're going to have some kind of united action to show that was inappropriate. And they didn't do that. There's been now a little bit of protest, but I don't think it's been particularly effective. Whether it would have been effective at all remains to be seen, but I don't think that there was enough of that. ProPublica, we have thought that we're going to come under some kind of attack, and we haven't done a lot of preparation yet because we don't know where the attack is what form it's going to take. So there are a variety of things that, I don't like to give these guys a fucking roadmap, but they probably don't need me to imagine it. But you could get federal investigations into us. We could have congressional investigations. We could have state AGs coming after us. There are we could get our C3 status investigated. We can imagine that. And then we could get lawsuits from wealthy people for things that are kind of like proxies, or they just see that we're vulnerable and they want to bring something. So those are the things that we imagine that we could face. So far, thank God, we have not faced it yet. Congress has talked. There have been Republicans in Congress who've talked about bringing us in to investigate the IRS tax series and leaks. We've, did nothing either illegal or unethical in that, and that's been adjudicated in some fashion in court already. And so I think we can completely hold our heads high on every aspect of that series. But we'll see. And then what I'm afraid of is that when journalism outfits go to find allies and go to find legal representation, what I'm worried about is that they will go after donors and go after law firms. So I don't know if you guys saw, but the Trump administration stripped the security clearance from Covington and Burling lawyers, and they were because they sort of perceived Covington and Burling as a Democratic firm, and they perceived were insulted that they had helped the January 6th investigations. And so what they're trying to do is identify, the right, and Russ Vaught at OMB, and there's this notion that liberal elites have taken over the commanding heights of every major institution in American society, from the media to the law to academia, and the deep state. And what they want to do is dismantle those power centers. And so they're going after the deep state, they're attacking the media, they're attacking academia. You see that with the stripping of the NIH funding. They're attempting to do that. And you see this with the law. They're going after these law firms. So what happens is, if ProPublica gets sued or investigated in some fashion, and we go to a Democratic, a law firm that is perceived as friendly to us, it's not going to be Democratic. We're not allied with the Democrats. I'm misspeaking, but a firm that would support us, and their other clients complain. Who are they going to choose? Are they going to choose ProPublica, or are they going to choose their clients? So I'm very worried about that. Are they going to go to our donors, and our donors going to say, it was nice to be feted at the country club for having done ProPublica, given to ProPublica, but now my merger is being held up. Are they going to continue to donate to us? I don't know. So we're small and not that weak, but we're vulnerable. Nonprofit journalism is vulnerable. I think they'll find our pain points and we'll be tested.
Yes.
Jesse, we've spoken about this a little bit, and thank you for taking the time to speak with us tonight. But I'm curious, what else do you think we can do besides be more objective, hit more facts in terms of getting Americans and the rest of the world to agree on what the truth is anymore, as opposed to just listening to one perspective or just one outlet?
Yeah, well, I was hoping that some of the young, brilliant people at Stanford would help me out, because I'm really struggling. I mean, the revelation I've had over the last few months is sort of slow to realize this, and maybe others have already realized it, is that truth is a luxury good, and it's also an acquired taste. So it's not only is it kind of expensive, you have to seek it out, it's time consuming and costs money now to get the truth, and also you really have to want it. You have to, it's unpleasant, right? So it's not always something, it's bitter. And it challenges your assumptions and makes you uncomfortable. It's not a great product to sell. Well, I don't know how I screwed up my life to offer this thing to people. And so, how does it win out? In this world where nobody needs it. I think that ProPublica is working on. We're like making gorgeous typewriters that have a beautiful sound to them, and and when you type on them, they click in this kind of really satisfying way in the smartphone era. And so I worry that our answer to this is to do more of it. And I don't think that's the right answer, but I'm not smart enough to solve what is the right answer. I wish I were.
What's your take on Twitter's or X's new way of checking the truth? Let's say the community notes. What's your take on that? Because the White House took down some notes due to a person who has 12 followers who commented on that, and the community said that's true. What's your take on people commenting on notes, on posts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Twitter's really become a cesspool. And so the community notes are not really seem to be functioning in any way to, like one of the things you don't want to do is, I'll see a video and there'll be a community note that says, well, this is actually an ad. It wasn't real. And so I've wasted my time on it, and as far as their business model, they want me engaged. They don't care, right? If I'm seeing an ad or I'm seeing a fake video or I'm seeing a real video, they just don't give a shit. As long as I'm in their garden, spending time on them, so they have zero incentive to do it. So the community notes don't seem to work in that sense to like weed out or disincentivize anybody from producing fake information. And then the community notes also don't work to shame people. And so the shame function of American society is broken. There is no cost anymore, no social opprobrium to lying or defrauding because people don't feel shame, right? The President of the United States doesn't feel shame. It's just like time up as a boring people. So, and the community notes is like a little kind of quaint little shame mechanism, right? You shouldn't have done that because that's not true. And like Elon Musk is impervious to it. So again, these sort of, I wasn't a big, I don't want the heavy hand of moderation taking away things that could arguably be true or that are debated. Like the question of like whether the COVID vaccine prevented transmission of COVID was something that was, a questionable aspect at the beginning of, I'm not a vaccine expert or a healthcare journalist, but so you don't want that. You want people to be able to debate that kind of thing. But whatever Community Notes thinks it's doing, and I don't think they think it's doing much, it ain't doing much.
Thank you so much for being here. I want to pick up on sort of your typewriter analogy, because I think it's really interesting in that ProPublica is this force for truth and good, but it only matters as much as people read it and engage with it. There's so much short form content, things that are untrue or highly polarized get more attraction. Our generation and the generations below us, I think increasingly fewer and fewer people sort of engage in kind of that long form content. Are there ideas or things that you have that you think could bring us back from this sort of doom loop of sort of untruth and mistrust? Are there things out there that you see working? I guess, are there bright spots in journalism or in any sort of content creation that you're excited about?
Well, so we experiment a lot with different forms. I know that most people think that our stories are just like long and boring and just an assemblage of thousands of words of facts, which I that's the stereotype, and I fed it tonight, and all stereotypes are kind of true, but we we have TikToks, we have Facebook, and we have Instagram. I'm not on any of those, but I hear that they're quite good and salient and effective, and they're short form. But I think we have some kind of, people who are interested in facts are on TikTok. It's not the exclusive province of people who are rejecting facts. So the people who are interested in facts and want to be on TikTok can find us and get facts, and then they know stuff. And so, anywhere between whatever percentage you want to put on it of American society has access to facts and is interested in gathering them. And maybe that's 40% at this point, or less than it's less than 50%. Maybe it's more, but there's sort of not all facts are convincing to people. So again, I wish that I could come here and say the obvious solution is X to this, not X, not your X, XYZ. The obvious solution is definitely not X. Whatever that guy's doing on X is not the solution. But I'm waiting for someone to explain, like, sort of how a broken democracy, a sick democracy, gets well, and how a society that cannot adequately assimilate facts and respond to facts then can do that. And right now, all I know to do is just to put more facts into the world.
Yeah. Hi. I'm monitoring the chat. You've got quite a few watching us on Zoom today. So I wanted to bring in one of their questions. One of the questions we have is, do you recommend non-US news outlets, BBC, Al Jazeera, et cetera, as possibly more immune from intimidation?
Certainly more immune from intimidation. I think The Guardian, BBC, they do quite good journalism, and they can do good journalism about the United States. And so yes, and the FT is a particularly good publication, clear-eyed publication. But I think the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post and ProPublica and other outlets are actually doing quite good journalism today, accountability journalism, important journalism about societal ills, and particularly about the developments of the Trump administration. I actually don't think that there are enormous developments that have gone unreported. I think what has happened is the opposite, is that we've been totally overwhelmed with all of the information. As my friend Julia Angwin says, it's a DDoS attack on our psyches. And, or as Steve Bannon put it, less technically, it's flooding the zone with shit. That's a strategy to overwhelm the opposition and overwhelm you psychologically and exhaust you, and nobody can assimilate the information. So adding the BBC to your diet, your media diet, is not going to be some kind of solution to this. And the fact that they can do more independent reporting also is good and useful and salutary. It's not a force for evil by any means, but it's, again, it's sort of, the problem is the surfeit of information, both from what they're doing and the outlets that produce the information. And that I don't think we've found a solution to.
Quick question is, it seems like a lot of the US media seems to align to one pole or the other. And there's a financial reason for that, because you're pay-per-click and you're in a polarized environment. New York Times is also coming to pressure for aligning to one side or the other. So the question I'm kind of asking, is there a lot of room for nonpartisan journalism? Because some of the issues is if all of the media is aligned to one party or the other, they'll never question a systemic issue like money in politics, like Citizens United, because both parties are on the take. So the question I'm trying to figure out is, outside of, frankly, going outside the US, I haven't actually found any good coverage on any of that outside of the FT, The Economist, and it always seemed that the US media publications didn't want to upset the apple cart of their party. And the problem becomes then that you have a whole bunch that are aligned with Democrats, and they're frankly very close to Wall Street and also donor financed. So do you see room for publications that, outside of your own, that don't actually fit one side or the other, given that the profit pressures are also going to push them to respond to a polarized electorate?
Yeah. So there's a lot in that. That wasn't a short question, Terry. Yeah. And there's a lot in it, and I think it's complex. So, in the 19th century, we had really partisan press that was explicitly aligned to different political factions and parties. And then over the 20th century, especially post-Watergate, there was a kind of professional standard that developed that was much more nonpartisan and elevated a kind of objective news gathering. And I actually think that that's the norm that continues to operate. So I kind of reject your premise with respect that that everybody has gone into their partisan corners. I do not see the New York Times as the equivalent of Fox News by any means, or OAN, or any of these extraordinarily, the state TV, media of the right. What I see is, the New York Times is a flawed publication. Most of the New York Times reporters lean liberal, but I think they're kind of really sort of centrist and establishment and institutionalist minded more than they really are liberal or left. And I don't think that they're aligned with the Democrats, and I think in fact they kind of try to prove that they're not aligned with the Democrats by kind of aggressively reporting on the Democrats. Although there were flaws, like the Biden, they didn't get inside the Biden White House, which I think was a major press failure. So what I think when you're talking about a systemic issue like campaign finance, the thing that hinders journalism from that is that we have a fetish for things that are new. and news. And at a certain point, when you become really kind of acclimated to a reality, it's hard to figure out, well, how do you address that in a way that's fresh? So if you got, I suspect, if you got 10 political reporters from the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal together and say, well, why don't you ever write about the failures of campaign finance and Citizens United? They'd say, well, how do I write that in a way, everybody knows that. And how do I write that story in a way that's fresh and interesting? It's not going to win me prizes. It's, there's all sorts of professional incentives that make it hard to see systemic issues. And in fact, I actually think that this is one of the really profound flaws of investigative journalism as a profession, which is that we focus on kind of a new specific thing that is wrong with a wrongdoer and a bad actor. And with campaign finance, it's a kind of sprawling story where there are multiple bad actors, and it's happened over time, and it's rotten on the Democrat side and the Republican side, and so it's a very, very hard story to attack. I mean, one of the things that we've talked about at ProPublica is if we were at ProPublica in the 1950s, how would we write about civil rights and segregation? Like, who would be the wrongdoer? Who would be the target? Would we be able to write about that story in a way that, if we wanted impact and accountability, would you be able to do that? And how would we be able to do that? And so, and climate change is another topic. Obviously, there are bad actors in civil rights. There are bad actors in segregation in the 1950s. There are bad actors in climate change, but these are societal problems. And so sometimes we wonder if the tool that we have, investigative journalism, is a hammer and we only need nails, and societal problems are not just nails. So it's a struggle.
That's all the time we have for questions. Please join me in thanking Jesse Eisinger. Thank you so much.
Thank you.